Thank you for the click. My name is Luxeley. People call me Luxeley. Today, I'm going to kick the quiver and get into the details of the Hunter, or Marksman Hunter, same thing obviously, in Battle for Azeroth. If you like the video, or you find one or two things informative, click a like. It's a lot easier and definitely cheaper than donating to my Patreon, and quite frankly, makes me a little bit happy. Let me get straight to the point. If you clicked on this video, you're probably wondering one of two things. Two questions are lurking in your mind. One, is improved from Legion? And to give you a quick answer, absolutely, without question. This version is much better than the Legion version. The second question lurking in your mind might be, is fun and engaging? And my answer is yes and no. A little bit of both. How could that be so? I'm not going to pull any punches here. I'm going to be very, very straightforward. How you feel about is going to be largely contingent on what your game mode of choice is during the end game. So for example, if you're into PvE and you're into raiding, I think you're going to find this boring. Is the damage good? Absolutely. Is the rotation smooth? Yes, this rotation is not clunky, but it's boring. I have to admit, from a long-term hunter here, it is kind of boring. If you're into mythic dungeons and progressing in that way, then you're going to start to be using a lot more mobility and a lot more utility, a lot more CC, and things start to get interesting, which leads me to PvP. If PvP is where your heart is, which is where my heart is and where I find my fun in World of Warcraft, you're going to love this spec. The overall mobility and CC and the utility is off the charts phenomenal. Off the charts phenomenal. And this largely leads into utility, which I'm going to talk about at the end of the video in extreme detail, because this has been greatly improved, more so than any other class in the game. Now, I've broken down the categories here for evaluation. First, single target damage. Second, AOE damage. Third, crowd control. Fourth, survivability, which is a combination of not only defenses but healing. Fifth is going to be mobility, which is your ability to get out of danger and your ability to stay on your target and keep yourself at pace with that target. And then the last one is the utility, because this is where a lot of improvements have been made with the pets. Pet utility is back, so we're going to really cover a lot of that, and it's going to bleed into every aspect, or weave itself into every aspect of the Marksman Hunter. Keep in mind, this isn't a guide. This is really just an overall first impression. Things can still change, but what I wanted to do for people was kind of go over where things are right here and now with Marksman Hunter. And I'm going to grade each category on a 1 through 5 basis. 1 meaning that it's rather weak and we could most likely expect a buff somewhere along the line. 5 meaning the complete opposite, that it's most likely overpowered and we could expect the nerf bat to take a swing and hit it. And somewhere in the middle obviously is number 3, where it's a generally fair type of gameplay, average, mediocre, etc., etc. With that all being said, let's get into it. Single target damage. In order to get a firm grasp of whether or not is fun, engaging, how the damage is, we got to take a look at some of the changes here, or pretty much all of the changes that are relevant in the BFA beta. Keep in mind, these things could change. This is how it is here and now. I'm breaking things down into 3 categories here. The first category is what's gone, what's been deleted, what's been pruned. This is in reference to artifact abilities that have an impact, because the reality is they're all gone, but I think only a few of them really will have an impact. What baseline abilities are gone and what talents are gone. The second category is what's returning but is a little bit different, whether something's been added to it, something's been taken away, a little bit of a buff, a little bit of a nerf. We're going to talk about what's returning but is different. And then the third category would be what is new. What new abilities do we have that are baseline, that are talents, that are very interesting and certainly going to add a new dynamic to the overall spec. Now, the first thing everybody's got to understand is gone, and probably already knows, is that trifecta of that random hunter mark that could be placed on a target. In some cases, it's not random, but you get the point. Hunter's mark, mark shot, vulnerability, that trifecta approach, that's all deleted, that's pruned, that's gone. That mechanic is no longer part of the game. The overall rotation, as a result, is a lot more straightforward, a little bit boring, but more straightforward, and it's very smooth. Now, obviously, since that whole trifecta is gone, mark shot is a casualty of that. Also gone. Windburst, that on-use artifact ability, hit pretty hard, had a cast time, had to hard cast it, and it also gave you a little bit of utility where you could get a speed boost in the wake, or your enemies would have a speed reduction in the wake. Well, that's no longer in the game at all. And this might seem like a very, very important pruning, but the reality is Marksman's Focus is gone. That was an ability, a passive ability that added 30 additional focus to your repertoire. That's gone. Off the top of your head, you might be thinking, wow, that's big. Well, not really, because a lot of that regular focus is being generated rather quicker. And we'll get into how all that works, but it's not as impactful as you might think. Now, as far as talents, 3 big talents are gone. There's more talents that are gone or have changed, but the reality is these are the big 3 that I think have somewhat of an impact. Black Arrow, which was great against plate wearers. Its shadow damage, that's gone. It was really good because it was good against plate, but it was kind of bad because it was easily dispellable, so kind of 50-50, but I'd rather have that shadow damage against plate, and unfortunately that's gone. True Aim is gone, which was a stacking damage based on successive aim shots or successive arcane shots. Pretty decent ability. That's gone. Patient Sniper obviously is also a casualty because that had the whole trifecta of Hunter's Mark shot, vulnerability. That's gone as well. Now, here's what's coming back but is a little bit different. In Legion, Arcane was a focus generator. In BFA, it's going to cost focus, which means it's going to be doing more damage. So that's damage that you could do mobile, damage that you could do that's not physical, that's hitting a little bit harder than it did in Legion as far as the same ability is concerned. True Shot is returning, but it's a little bit different. In Legion, it gave you 40% haste for 15 seconds, had a 3-minute cooldown, and there were various things that could reduce that cooldown, particularly in the artifact. There were a few traits, or one trait, that were able to reduce that cooldown. Well, that's no longer the case in BFA because the artifact is gone. There are a few abilities that you can use or choose to reduce this cooldown, but it's not as much as what the artifact once gave you. BFA, it's 30% haste, 15-second duration, and it gives you an extra charge of aim shot. And you're thinking now, charge of aim shot? Yes, well, in BFA, you currently have 2 charges of aim shot. And I want to point out, in Legion, it costs you 50 focus to use aim shot. In BFA, 30 focus, and it hits a hell of a lot harder in BFA than it did in Legion. The downside of aim shot, of course, is it is still something that needs to be hard cast. In other words, you got to stand still and use it. But overall, it hits hard, and you're just going to have to work it in. Locked and Loaded does come back, so you can get that RNG instant proc. As you're leveling, it doesn't proc a lot, but as your gear improves, you're going to start to get more procs, especially at max level, and as the X-Pack progresses. We saw that in Legion, and I would expect more of the same in BFA. Here's what's new that's baseline. Now, you have 2 focus generators that are baseline, one that really does hardly any damage, and the other one that does a hell of a lot of damage, and they both generate 10 focus. They're both new. Although Steady Shot was in the game before, this is an ability that does physical damage. It has a cast time, and you can cast while moving. There is a modifier to reduce that cast time, but the reality is, from what I've experienced, you're not going to be using this that much. You're going to get enough focus from Rapid Fire, which has a short cooldown, generates 10 focus, and does a hell of a lot of damage. Think of this ability as a localized barrage on steroids. It does quite a bit of damage, has a fun animation, and I think it's a great addition to the Marksman Hunter. Here are a few new talents that I think have some kind of an impact, or worth mentioning at the very least. The first one is Serpent Sting. Obviously, if you played Hunter in the past, you know that this isn't a new ability or damage ability here. It's been in the game before. It's a very weak dot. It's not even worth taking, even though it's something that does nature damage, which as an MM Hunter, you want to do as much non-physical damage as possible to be more effective against plate and PvP. But this is really a very, very weak dot, and it's not worth taking. Also, we have Hunter's Mark returning, which is another rather underwhelming ability here. Instead of being passive, or should I say RNG in Legion, here it's an on-use ability, and it gives you a 5% damage boost on that target, which is not a lot. And if the target dies while Hunter's Mark is on a target, you generate an instant 20 focus, which is pretty decent, but there's better talents in that particular tier. And here's where the fun begins. There's a new talent called Double Tap. I really hope this stays in the game because it is absolutely huge. Here's what it does and how it works. You hit Double Tap and your next aim shot will fire an instant aim shot at the target. So essentially it's 2 aim shots, one after the other in a row. Huge, huge damage. But it also can affect rapid fire. Rapid fire, as I said, is a rapid pulsating, rapid shooting arrows at a single target, kind of like a barrage. Well, if you hit Double Tap before you hit rapid fire, not only will you get 2 times the focus, but you'll get 2 times the duration of that rapid fire. So Double Tap is a pretty darn huge ability. You could use it to have a real impact like Aim Shot, or you could use it to have a moderate impact like a rapid fire, but you're going to gain a lot more focus, twice as much focus. Other notable mentions here, a Murder of Crows returns, stays the same, copy and paste. It's physical damage, but it does reset, so it's exactly the same. Piercing Shot returns as a talent, instant cast. It's pretty much the same, some marginal changes that really aren't going to affect the damage. Now, the Mastery also remains exactly the same. Now, I do sound a little bit optimistic here, and that's because the damage is very, very strong. It is a very, very powerful hitting spec. Got to give it a 4.5 out of 5 on single target damage. I think abilities like Rapid Fire and Double Tap make this a little bit more fun, but what really makes it fun is when you start implementing some of the mobility and some of the utility, which I'm going to talk about later on. AOE damage. There are a few talents that are no longer around that augmented your AOE damage, such as Sentinel. Sentinel had a limited use, but when you did use it, it was something that had a great impact. For example, if you're in 3s or even in 2s and you're up against a dual melee type of comp, the reality is the majority of the time those melee are going to be focused on one target, which means they're going to be clustered together, and you could use Sentinel to augment your damage. You could also use Sentinel in certain battlegrounds where players tend to be clustered together. For example, Eye of the Storm, Battle for Gilneas, Deepwind Gorge, and Arathi Basin. Otherwise, you didn't really take this talent. Volley, as far as PvP was concerned, really wasn't used much, and I don't think it was used much in PvE either. It was a rather underwhelming ability, and it is gone. Now, Sidewinders, not sure what it's called, but I think you guys know what I'm talking about. I could have easily put this in the single target category, but that was kind of long, kind of cluttered, so I threw it here because it also can be put here. AOE damage. I like this ability. It was fun. And it also did nature damage, which certainly helped you quite a bit. Well, nonetheless, it's gone. Now, here's what talents return that are focused on AoE. Barrage. Barrage is back, and Barrage is doing as much damage as Barrage has always done. Piercing Shot can also be a AoE, and that is back as well. And Explosive Shot is back, an ability I didn't use much. Matter of fact, didn't use it at all in Legion because it really wasn't a very reliable ability. The mechanics of it didn't always work very well. Well, that's changed. Blizzard did something where this ability is a lot more reliable, and it hits pretty damn hard. And even if you mess it up because you're suddenly getting attacked or you get CC'd, it will refund a portion of that focus that you use, which is actually pretty cool in BFA. That was not the case in Legion. Now, Multi-Shot does make a return, but it's a little bit different. In Legion, Multi-Shot essentially generated focus, which meant you were able to spam it, pretty much spam it. Here, it's kind of not a spammable ability. It costs focus, and if you're lucky, you're going to get maybe 2 or 3 of those off. Trick Shot. This used to be a talent. Now it's a passive ability, and it was very, very similar to the way it performed in Legion when it was a talent. If you hit 3 or more targets with Multi-Shot, you'll hit up to 5 targets with your next aim shot. This is huge when you use it with Locked and Loaded because you might have that instant proc, but otherwise it's a pretty strong ability. And here's what makes it really interesting. You could hit Double Tap before you use aim shot and get that proc, and instead of hitting 5 targets, it'll hit 10. And it also is affected by Rapid Fire. So the way it would work with Rapid Fire is that if you hit 3 or more additional targets with your Multi-Shot, Rapid Fire will hit 1 additional target, and it'll generate 20 focus instead of 10 focus. So you could use Double Tap here as a focus generator or hard-hitting ability, when you decide to use it with aim shot. Overall, the AOE damage for Marksman Hunter from Legion to BFA, I think it was a little bit better. Just a little bit better in Legion because you did have procs of wind arrows and you were using nature damage as opposed to physical damage. And sidewinders, somebody tell me which it is. The reality is, it's a little bit worse. Not a lot worse, just a little bit worse, but that's okay because it was pretty damn good in Legion, and it is still pretty damn good in BFA. Overall, I give it a 4. Crowd control. Freezing Trap, Tar Trap, Concussive Shot all make a return in BFA. Concussive Shot has a little bit of a different animation, a different sound. It's a lot more engaging, a lot more fun, but still useless at stopping monks or demon hunters. Counter Shot also makes a return, and so does Bursting Shot, but it's a little bit different. In Legion, Bursting Shot disoriented the targets and knocked them back. In BFA, it knocks back the target and snares them. You might be thinking, that sucks, but don't worry about it because the PvP talent Scattershot, which will disorient a single target, is making a comeback. And of course, Explosive Trap with that knockback. Blizzard tried to take it away in Legion. Hunters across the world cried and complained. Blizzard put it back. I don't think they'll try to take it away again. Explosive Trap, hell of a lot of fun. A hallmark of the Hunter. Binding Shot is now a talent. It always was a talent, but unfortunately it's a talent up against another pretty darn good talent in Post Haste. This is a very, very tough decision every single hunter is going to have to make, unfortunately. Wyvern Sting, another talent, is gone. I have mixed feelings about this. Why? I think it's a good thing. Wyvern Sting used to DR with Freezing Trap, and it kind of sucked. But Wyvern Sting also gave you the ability to CC 2 targets at once. Good, bad, all depends on how you feel about it. Nonetheless, it's gone, so there's no point talking about it anymore. If you're thinking all of this information sounds a little bit blah and underwhelming, well, the reality is you're 110% correct. But I have to point out, Pet CC and utility will be returning and paying dividends big time. I decided to put all this under the utility section just simply because there's a lot to talk about. And the fact is, pet abilities are going to have a way of filling gaps that you might hear throughout this video, whether it's in the survivability section or it's the CC section, the mobility section. You're going to start to hear how all this pet utility is really going to facilitate some of these gaps. I promise you, this is where the trust comes into play. Trust me, when we talk about pet utility, you're going to hear a lot of good things, and that's the last segment. Overall, when you consider that into the equation, I give Hunter CC a solid 4. Certainly not as good as a mage, but a lot better than most other classes. A solid 4. Survivability. Well, it's kind of a good news, bad news scenario, and keep in mind, you gotta trust me, pet utility is gonna help facilitate this particular area. Now you're gonna hear some things you might not like to hear. Aspect of the turtle, the heal. It was called Healing Shell. It was a pretty big heal. Passive artifact trait, gone. Disengage had a damage reduction. Passive artifact called Survival of the Fittest, gone. Kinda big right there. Exhilaration does make a comeback, 30% heal. In tier 45, you have Natural Mending, which for every 20 focus spent, it will lower the CD by 1 second on Exhilaration. Remember I said that earlier in the video, so now I'm delivering on that. There's your ability that will lower your cooldown on Exhilaration, so there's the trust. Camo makes a return, which is actually going to be really huge when it comes to war mode, because you're going to be able to stealth, you're going to be able to heal yourself while you're stealth as long as you don't have dots on you. That's pretty huge. Copy and paste from Legion, it's the exact same thing. Let's go over some of these PvP talents, because they make a comeback, and this is where you're going to get a lot of your defenses and even some of your overall heals, or things that are going to give you the ability to heal more often, would be a better way of putting it. Dragon Scale, 20% damage reduction from magic, that makes a return. Survival Tactics, where you feign death and you remove all the magic effects, and you have 99% damage reduction for a second and a half, that returns as well. As I speak, there are a ton of Shadow Priests and Affliction locks that are searching for tissues. Ranger's Finesse, this is one of those abilities that is going to reduce the remaining cooldown on Exhilaration. Every single time you cast Aim Shot, you're going to reduce your cooldown on Aspect of the Turtle and Exhilaration by 5 seconds. So if you take that and you couple that with the regular talent, Natural Mending, now you're looking at having more healing, or at least healing more often, because you're reducing the cooldown on 2 big defensive cooldowns there. Roar of Sacrifice is a new talent, but not new to the game. This is an ability that a pet used to give you for the longest time. It's basically an ability that you hit and your opponent is unable to crit against you, and 20% of that damage will go to your pet, last 12 seconds on a 1-minute cooldown. I mentioned this throughout the video, I'm going to say it again. Pet utility is going to be huge, and it's going to help fill some of the gaps in this particular section when it comes to your survivability. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. Overall, your survivability, I would say, is about equal to what it was in Legion. I would give it a solid 3.5. Mobility. This is the bread and butter of the hunter. This is what separates the average from the good from the great. Mobility. Aspect of the cheetah, disengage, and 2 particular talents, Trailblazer and Post Haste, all make a comeback. Aspect of the cheetah will no longer make you immune to snares, which kind of sucks, but that's okay because you will get, as utility, you could choose to get Master's Call back. There is a family of pets, a school of pets, that will give you Master's Call. So even though you're losing that immunity to snares from Aspect of the Cheetah, which was an artifact trait, now you're getting Master's Call. If you want it, it's there for you to take. You are losing a few other artifact traits here, though. You're losing Windburst, which did some fair damage. We talked about that earlier. And we also talked about how it gives a speed boost to the hunter and to the party, a 50% speed boost to the players, including the hunter, that run through that wake, and a 50% snare to the enemies that run through that wake. That's pretty huge. That sacrifices quite a bit of mobility because that's gone. Fleet Wind, which is what I mentioned, it's the artifact trait that Aspect of the Cheetah had that gave you a 50% dodge and it made you immune to snares. Well, that's gone. Here's the good news. I said this, pet utility returns, and there's a lot of good here. The particular school of pets that gives you Master's Call are the Cunning Pets, and Cunning Pets will also give you a passive flat 8% speed boost, which we're going to get into more detail in the utility section, which is the next section. Concussive Shot returns, 50% snare. The reality is it's on a 5-second cooldown. It stops just about everybody, but it doesn't really stop monks or demon hunters. Tar Trap does return. It's an AOE snare. You're looking at 50% damage reduction. And then there's quite a few talents here that could help you out. Just to reiterate, I'm talking about the PvP talents here. Hunting Pack, Aspect of the Cheetah, 50% reduction in the cooldown, and a 90% speed boost to both you and the allies for a very short period of time. So that kind of makes up for what you lost with Windburst and pays some dividends as well. So hunters are actually profiting there when it comes to their mobility. And as I said earlier, I want to repeat this for those of you that weren't listening or just happened to miss it. Cunning Pets, one of the schools, is going to give you both Master's Call and a passive 8% flat speed boost. We're going to get to the utility section next. I know you guys have been waiting for that, and I appreciate it. Overall, I give Hunter Mobility a solid 4.5. It's pretty good. It's much improved. This is going to make a big difference in PvP, and I think that this is where a lot of the fun is added back into the Hunter spec in PvP and in competitive PvE, such as Mythic Dungeons. Utility. I promised, now I deliver. Pet utility is back, it's making a comeback, and it's really, really huge. Rather than tell you what's going on here, I'm going to show it to you. I'm going to break it down into 3 schools or families: Ferocity, Tenacity, and Cunning. Each of those schools or families, whatever it is you want to call it, each one offers a passive and an active ability that is going to help you out one way or another. And certainly this creates a lot of choice. This creates a lot of versatility. But those pets also, depending on the pet that you choose, will also have some kind of active or passive ability that's also going to affect the hunter. Matter of fact, in an earlier build on the beta, hunters had Tranquilizing Shot come back, which was a dispel. Hunters were crying about it, that it was gone. I was upset, but the reality is there is a family of pet that has a dispel, and it's on a very short cooldown, and it's better that the pet uses his focus than you use your focus, and the pet's using less focus, so it's actually an improvement overall. So you guys will see, rather than me tell, everything that's going on here with the pets. I could get into greater detail. I'm not going to do it. I'm thinking of doing another video, so leave a like. Let me know if you want to see that, where I could break down what general passive and active abilities each school of pet is bringing. You know, what it is that a spider is bringing, what it is that a wolf is bringing, what it is that a bear is bringing. Something like that might be more in line and closer to launch because I want to get through more of these first impression videos with more classes first. But let me know if you want to see that eventually. But this is a big, big return to the game. I also want to point out that Lone Wolf is very, very different. The reality is Lone Wolf is no longer a talent. It is now a passive baseline ability. The way it works, if your pet dies, you decide to dismiss your pet, you get a 10% damage boost. It should be more. That is a fact, but the reality is it's 10% instead of 16%. That doesn't necessarily make me happy, but I don't also have to waste a talent space on Lone Wolf, and if my pet happens to die, I get that instant talent buff, so that's pretty darn good. Here's the way this works out. There are people that crunch the numbers. I found this on the forums. If you use Lone Wolf for AOE damage, you're going to do more damage. That's just the way it works. If you decide to use a pet, you want to do it with single target damage. So the numbers work out in your favor. Single target damage, use the pet. AOE, do not use the pet. So you might be thinking, okay, that's easy. I could switch in and out. But hold the phone. Wait a second. Blizzard's not making it that simple. There is a 60-second window where the damage takes some time to ramp up. The reality is it's ramping up 1% every 6 seconds. So that kind of sucks. So you can really, you're going to have to really manage it. It's going to take some time to ramp up, so you're not going to be able to switch on the fly that often. But overall, your utility here is pretty darn outstanding, and it has a hell of a lot of choices. You could choose what it is you want to bring to the fight. So if you know you're in a knife fight, you could bring a gun. If you know you're in a gunfight, you could bring a bazooka. That's the way it works. There's a lot of versatility. There's a lot of choice here. Overall, I got to give this a 5. I think that not that this is something that is completely new to hunters, because hunters have always had this utility in the past, but the reality is we've had 2 X-Packs of pruning. Most of that pruning occurred in utility and crowd control, and now hunters are getting a lot back, and other classes are getting some back. That's huge. That's giving hunters an edge. That's why I give it a solid 5 and call it like it is. This is Luxeley saying, whatever it is by you, whether it's morning, or it's afternoon, or it's night, make it epic.